thanks for joining us with Conversations with Cliff. This is my good friend and president of Standard User Institute, Cliff Lash, who is not new to the education world, but really starting to step into the cybersecurity or information security space. I am David Evenden. I am the owner and founder of Standard User Cyber and Standard User Institute, and Cliff is joining us here. The goal here of this Conversations with Cliff webinar series is to really dive into the basics and beginner level conversations and definitions and expectations of what cybersecurity or information security actually is. So Cliff, thanks so much for joining me.
You're welcome, David. Thank you so much. I think these conversations are going to be a lot of fun, and you and I have had lots of spirited conversations in the past. We've been friends now for well over a decade, and we've talked a lot about a lot of different things. So I'm looking forward to these conversations about cybersecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. So we decided to start the Conversations with Cliff webinar series because Cliff and I were talking. He's started the process of reading through Cybersecurity for Dummies, and in the process of reading through Cybersecurity for Dummies, he had what he might think are very rudimentary questions, when in reality they're very advanced questions. Like, for instance, what is man-in-the-middle attack, and what is the difference between information security and cybersecurity, and why are they often used interchangeably? So anyways, and I started answering some of his questions and really being very targeted and trying to explain it to him, and then realized, I wish we would have recorded that. So kind of step back on there, actually maybe have some of those additional questions, maybe sort of recap some of them in the starting first few. We'll do these, we'll plan to do these on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Of course, today being the 2nd of April and the first Tuesday, first Thursday. And so if I look ragged and scrubby, it's because we're all in quarantine and no one's giving haircuts or beard trims. And of course, Cliff looks phenomenal, as he always does. But so Cliff, what just to sort of dive right in and get started, what are some of your first questions, things that are sort of, they don't necessarily have to be the things we've talked about before, but maybe just sort of address what you're reading and what's going on right now.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll give a plug to the book that you mentioned, if that's okay. Yeah. Cybersecurity for Dummies. And when David asked me to help out with the Standard User Institute, I just wanted to know more about the topic that the school teaches. And so I found this book, Cybersecurity for Dummies. It is a brand new book published in 2020, so it's about as up to date as you can get, written by Joseph Steinberg, who has good credentials. So I'm going to start with that question that you mentioned, the distinction between information security and cyber security. Now, Joseph Steinberg says that cybersecurity can actually cover a lot of different topics, and it means different things to different people. And so there's a lot of subsets, I think, under cybersecurity. Some people, it's just keeping their email from being read by other people. For a business owner, it might keep their credit card information safe. For other businesses, it might be to keep their source codes confidential and other priority information. And that's probably too much information. But anyway, he says cybersecurity has to do with electronic stuff, where he says the information security is like a broader category that can that refers to other types of information, such as the old way, which we still use, of locking up files inside a file cabinet. And he says that a lot of people kind of confuse the two, or they interchange the two, of information security and cybersecurity. And in a previous conversation with you, I sort of get the feeling that you might be one of these people that kind of interchanges cybersecurity and information security. But how would you define those two? How would you define information security, and how would you define cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we'll get to that next time on our next conversation. No, just kidding. It's incredibly loaded. It's an incredibly loaded question. It's difficult to answer because, and you pointed on it specifically, like the larger community is infosec. We are an information security community, so we do deal with protecting physical assets, not necessarily just electronic in nature. And cybersecurity does sort of boil over into that world of technological security. You know, how do I perform different types of forensics or offensive security, or and even in that terminology alone, offensive security, you have different realms of people who believe that offensive security is doesn't even, it's not even real, like it's fake, just because your offensive operations are, you know, are government or DoD specific, military specific type of operations, and as soon as you start to
Now,
say offensive security,
stop. Say that again. People think what is fake?
just the idea or the coined phrase of offensive security, they just
Offensive security.
yeah,
Okay.
they don't even like that phrase because they might work in a realm where offensive operations are very something very specific. When in reality, there's a much larger community that does believe offensive security. I mean, obviously it is. If you're performing offensive operations against an organization that's paid you to identify vulnerabilities in their environment, that's offensive security. I'm sorry, I'm sorry to have to tell you, but you know, if you're an elitist who thinks that only offensive operations can be performed by specific operators performing offensive operations against nation state actors, well, you know, you're not really living in the world that everyone else is living in. Anyways, we're kind of getting off topic because, but to as one of the examples that the book mentions, is it actually puts into perspective the categories of looking at it like a cabinet, for instance. You might have different shelves or different doors, and if information security is the cabinet in a whole, and cybersecurity is one of those doors, there's a bunch of shelves in there. And the shelf of the cybersecurity door that is information security in a whole, you'll have forensics, you'll have mitigation, you'll have email security, you'll have offensive operations, you'll have blue team, red team, purple team, just the entire world that all exists within cybersecurity as a whole. So in my opinion, that's how I would define that.
What do you mean by offensive security?
Well, that's a great question. So penetration testing, for instance, is the act of performing offensive operations, if you will, against. Let's just say, for instance, I'll walk it through because I'm using terminology I'm expecting everyone else understands, and that's the point of this, is that they may not.
Yeah.
So if we talk about in the perspective, an organization needs to identify what the particular vulnerabilities might be in their environment. A vulnerability meaning the capability or probability for a malicious hacker, an attacker, if you will, to gain access to their corporate or enterprise environment. It's okay. Well, you know what? I need to see if it's possible. I'm going to go out. I'm going to hire a hacker to try to gain access to my infrastructure. And you coin that under the phrase a penetration test or a pen test. You try to gain access to the infrastructure. Uh, you're performing offensive tactics against an organization or enterprise, and the difference here, a person can do the exact same thing against the same organization. What makes it legal and what makes it not legal is authority. Do you have the authority to be doing that? Have you signed a statement of work? Have you signed, you know, the whole documentation giving you specific authority to actually be able to perform those operations? Most of the time that authority comes with some type of monetary incentives. You've signed a statement of work saying, yes, do this, and I'll pay you to perform these different actions.
So you do penetration testing. So basically, what you're saying is that people pay you to try to hack into their systems.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's what you do for the purpose of them knowing where their vulnerabilities are and how to plug those holes, so to speak.
Right. Again, it is in order to plug those holes, but for the process of reducing the potential impact to business continuity. If you're plugging holes just for the sake of plugging holes, but that environment has access to nothing and it has no impact to business continuity or corporate enterprise or anything like that, then really the purpose of doing that is very minimal and potentially low. The greater the impact, the more value you're bringing to an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but yes, to that same point. So, again, when we talk about let's just define these different terminology here: offensive operations, offensive security, and then maybe even offensive intelligence. So, offensive security being the act of performing authoritative penetration tests against an enterprise organization who's hired you to do that. Offensive operations might be a nation state or government organization who's trying to gain access to a target organization in order to perform some type of specific, government or operational activity.
Mm-hmm.
Offensive intelligence might be, hey, we think this government is going to do this. Are you able to prove that? Sure, I can potentially prove that, but I need to hack into this organization or this country, collect that information, bring it back, read that intelligence to see if yes, they're not going to do this. Like I've read these email chains, there is sort of just scare tactics. And we've seen, there's tons of movies sort of talk about different environments like that where somebody might gain access to something to sort of see if you can prove something.
I'm still interested in why is this controversial for some people?
That's a great question. And the only thing that I can really say is that some people that the DoD defines offensive operations very specifically, and that if you're performing offensive operations or offensive security, it should be under the phrase of a penetration test. And if you work inside of an environment where you're performing government oversight offensive operations, it needs to be within the realm of offensive operations is hacking into an adversarial organization, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah, and why people take offense to that word being used interchangeably in the commercial world and in the government world, I don't really know the answer to that. I guess I would have to have a conversation with them and maybe even get a psychologist to join and figure out why they feel so strongly about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, just on a somewhat related topic, I mean, just on the news this morning, I heard that a hotel chain had been someone had gained access to some of their files. They do not think they got any credit card numbers, but they did get people's names and addresses and other personal information. So they've released that they've made it known that that has happened to people that they've served. And so you're saying that that's one of the things that pen testing helps prevent. It helps people know where people can get in to get stuff like that.
Yeah, I would say that's true. I would say some of the basic entry points, default passwords, patch management, life cycles, update management, firewall security and implementation and hardening, host hardening, all of those things which we can get, we can dive deeper into, future or additional conversations.
Mhm.
That's kind of where uh, the baseline and sort of the step process of what you would do in order to ensure that the security is up to
Yeah.
par. Now, having said that, you can do all of that. You can have 4 penetration tests a year, and you can hire hundreds and hundreds of people in order to do different things in security throughout. the probability that somebody who really wants to gain access is still going to gain access is high. There's no such thing as 100% secure in the online IT world, and so with well-trained people who can develop zero-day exploits, if you will, or even excessively diligent script kiddies, you even diligent script kiddies can be successful in those environments.
Yeah. My dad used to say, he was a farmer, and he would say when we were locking stuff up, he would say, locks are made to keep the good people out.
That's exactly right. One of my good friends, Wirefall, he says the same thing. Locks keep the honest people out. So yeah, and lock picks and lipsticks definitely is. She teaches lock picking at the Dallas Hackers meetup as well, and she's really good at that. And again, sort of coining back on that phrase, if you know how to pick a lock, then there's really no point in having it on there. So yeah.
The reality is, almost all of our information is turning into cyber at a very rapid rate of speed.
True. Yeah, that is very true.
So in some ways, they are almost the same. But can you see what kinds of security would be information security, but not necessarily cyber security?
Well, that's a great question. I think falling back on your printed documents in a filing cabinet and ensuring that that's adequately stored and properly secured. I think that's a great example of that. Again, to your same point, with everything sort of going online, it's hard to answer that question with more examples right now, because I think even before, we probably had different examples where it may have not necessarily been electronic. It may have been like just necessarily digital in nature. But even now, today, I would even still call digital algorithms to be cybersecurity focused or in that realm as well.
Yeah. Joseph Steinberg uses an example. I mean, he says that in some ways the two worlds kind of cross. And he says, even if somebody writes a password down on a piece of paper and they just leave it laying on their desk, and someone sees it there and grabs it and takes it, that's basically not a cyber crime. That's just basically information security, where they have stolen your password written on a piece of paper. But then they might take it and use it to access your system online, and then it becomes part of the cyber world.
Cyber world, yeah, that's right. And again, to that same point, I would say even my conversation in here, the conversation of protecting what we're talking about on the computer is one aspect of that, but within the realm of my room, that would be another example of information security. How do I prevent someone from listening into me, listening into my room and in my conversation here? Yeah. That might be proximity-based information security. Yeah. So other than those things, I mean, just because I'm not a big close access penetration tester, I don't really know. I don't know a lot of those answers.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Cool. Well, then, Cliff, thank you so much for joining. I look forward to our next conversation on Tuesday, and hopefully we can sort of dive into maybe some of the maybe even talk about the differences in man-in-the-middle attacks, or what what a zero-day exploit is, or anything like that. Maybe after this conversation. So great, awesome. Thank you again, and have a great week.
All right. Thank you.